if a South Asian woman has been raised with media that represents her as someone who is supposed to be, all giving and be perfect all the time, be the best mother and be the best daughter-in-law, and be the best daughter and be the best wife, while also having her own independent personality, while also being involved in the community and giving back. But at the same time, at work, be excelling at everything and be in leadership positions. And there's so much pressure being put on being this well-rounded, perfect individual.
In every single interaction, there comes a moment when we wonder, do you see me? Do you hear me? Welcome to the Heart to Heart podcast. I'm your host, Gayathri Shukla, and I am the founder of Campfire Kinship, an organization building inclusive cultures through storytelling. This season is about exploring something that is core to being human, and that is our need to belong. So imagine gathering around a campfire with stories reaching your heart. I am partnering with CJSW 90.9 and recording in Kansas or Calgary, a sacred place where the Bow and Elbow Rivers meet, and home to Blackfoot Confederacy, Tsuut'ina, Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation, and all residents of Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Heart, where we explore stories of belonging and creating change. And speaking of creating change, today we're diving into a really important conversation about breaking barriers for South Asian women in STEM careers. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine. Now, of course, this is a topic that's close to my heart because I sort of identify with all of the above, of being a woman of South Asian descent and being an engineer as well. So I've had the privilege of working with Dr. Roopali Chaudhary, who is today's guest, who is also the founder and CEO of Lotus STEMM. And just a little bit of backstory, I guess. I first met you, Dr. Roopali, during the pandemic, which, oh my gosh, it was 5 years ago now. And I think I had signed up to volunteer for one of Lotus STEMM's events. And this was around the same time that I'd started Campfire Kinship as a sort of a passion project. And it was so amazing to discover so many common passions with you, especially when it comes to supporting women in STEM. And I'm so glad that we kept in touch because, what do you know, a few years later, lo and behold, we were able to brainstorm together a proposal and actually have the fortune of receiving a grant from Women and Gender Equality Wage for this project that we're working on to amplify South Asian women in STEM and really take a intersectional angle at looking at barriers and finding solutions. So the project is called Breaking Barriers, but let's not talk about the project yet. First, I want to introduce you, Dr. Roopali, and let me know if I should keep calling you Dr. Roopali or Roopali. I've been calling you Roopali, but I also have a reverence for the work that you do, and especially as the fact that you wear so many different hats. So I understand you are a cellular and molecular biologist. You're also an entrepreneur, founder of Lotus STEMM, and you are, one of your hats that you wear is you're a senior director of cells and biomaterials integration at Alarta Life Science Inc. And then you also own a small bakery specializing in science-themed cakes. Ooh, I'd love to get my hands on one of those. And you enjoy building furniture. So talk about being multi-talented. I don't think it's any surprise that you were recently recognized for your work through the King Charles III Coronation Medal. Roopali, it's such an honor to get to know you, to work with you, to welcome you to this show today. So maybe let's start with your personal story of what inspired you to start Lotus STEMM.
Well, first off, thank you for that introduction. And you can call me Roopali. There's no need for formalities at all. The doctor is not something I flex unless I feel that I need to demand respect from someone. So it's all good. We're in good company here. What sparked me to start Lotus STEMM? I think it goes back to, as an immigrant child moving to Canada, my parents made a collective decision with us as kids to move here from Saudi Arabia. And I moved here when I was 13. So I was fairly young, not quite like as actively involved in the decision making, but at the same time, old enough to see the repercussions of the move that had on my family. And my parents stayed in a complex situation where my father stayed back in Saudi Arabia to continue earning, and my mom stayed here with the three kids, ensuring that we were finishing our education and moving forward with university and my career, which is why my parents made the decision to Canada in the first place. It was that stability. Um, as So we moved to Mississauga in Ontario, which at the time was diversifying more. But then my brother got into University of Waterloo, and so we moved down to Waterloo in Ontario, which at the time was not very diverse. This is like late 1990s, early 2000s. And that's where I finished my high school and went off to do an undergraduate. Now, fast forward, I was the first in my family to move away from home for an undergraduate degree. And as a girl from what I like to call a liberal conservative Indian family, and I think many people will understand what I mean by that. It was a bittersweet moment because for my parents, it was, yes, she's going to grow and she gets her independence, but at the same time, that traditional mindset of, oh, girl has moved away, but the son stayed at home. So we moved to Waterloo because my brother went to university there, and I went off to downtown Toronto at University of Toronto. I then decided to pursue an academic career rather than going into more of a professional degree. And STEM was always part of me ever since I was a child. But when I'd finished my PhD, I had defended, my parents hosted the local Mondays, the temple's Sunday prayers. And we go in, we cook the food for the prasad, the offerings that's made. We cook the food that would be given afterwards, the Priti Bhoj. And after all of it was done, so that was my only celebration for finishing the PhD, was I did this with the family, I did this with our family friends. And I looked around at the end when we were done cleaning, all of the ladies were sitting down and we were just sipping tea. And at that moment is when I learned that a family friend who we had known for a number of years had a PhD from India. But in Canada, she did not work in that field anymore. Now, I don't know what her PhD was in, but not only did she not work in that field, she never talked about the career that she had. And I sat around looking at all of the aunties at this table who had come to help us as we were all sipping tea, realizing I don't actually know what any of their job titles or careers were, other than my own mom. And even with my mom, I only know surface level. But when I looked over at all of the uncles who were sitting at a separate table, I remember thinking, like, I know who's working where, and I know what their titles are. And realizing in that moment that not only did the women not really talk about their careers, they spent a lot more time talking about familial or work-life balance issues, while the men had a different type of conversation that could be related to politics, or they were talking about their own jobs or what they do in their jobs and why that's really important. I would hear snippets of, but I don't hear that from the aunties. And it was this moment, like, I never bothered to ask either. I went to uncles for mentorship or guidance, but I didn't go to the aunties either. That wasn't something that was like upfront in my mind. And on top of that, they didn't talk about it. So I still find myself going to my mom to ask about recipes and how to help, like how to do a work-life balance. But I talk to my dad about what is going on at work and how do I manage a managerial position now. So it's this like dichotomy that has happened, and not intentionally either. So I think that was a moment that I realized, if this has been happening and it is happening, it continues to happen, next generation is going to see the same issues. So any barriers that I felt where I didn't feel I belonged or I didn't know how to handle these situations, I didn't have women that were going through the same feelings or thoughts or experiences to lean on. I was leaning on men who had a very different perspective on it. And that is probably one of the initial thoughts where I was like, I think something needs to be done. But I didn't know at the time what. It took a few years after that for me to get to a point where I started a nonprofit to help change the mindset within the community, but also provide a platform for that next generation to see themselves represented as well. That was a very long-winded answer, but just kind of like that inception of where I think the first seed of Lotus STEMM came to mind, but there's a lot more stories of Lotus STEMM got established.
But even the way you described that, the inception of that seed of how Lotus STEMM got started, Roopali, I love that self-awareness that you had to go, when you look back on your journey and kind of pick out those defining moments that really created the motivation, right? Because you're right, we're coming from a similar background myself. I also lived in Saudi. I'm actually just finding that out about you today, that you had also lived in Saudi Arabia. But moving from the Middle East, where I had also seen my mom take a backseat when it came to her career, like she was a homemaker and she was proud of that, but also she didn't have the opportunity to actually pursue a career in Saudi Arabia at the time. And you're right, there's this dichotomy, right? We see the men are how we call uncles and aunties in our friend circles in this South Asian community. We see them sort of falling into this dichotomy of different traditional roles, and it's really been upon our generation to start to shift some of those narratives and break those narratives, which I think is something that our listeners can really relate to, because when we talk about barriers for women in STEM, we often don't talk about those intersectional barriers, right? Like we hear a lot about how to support women in STEM, but what is that added impact of race, culture? And in a way, this is what you do through your nonprofit at Lotus STEM. So I'd love to hear your take on that, and also maybe tell me more about like the career struggles that come with that, right? Do you think there's sort of the silence around those career struggles? What is unique about this intersection that you think is the reason Lotus STEM does this work?
That is such a loaded question. I think there are a few things that come to mind, and as you mentioned, like that intersectionality is something that only recently we've been talking about more publicly. There have been people that have been doing this research for decades now, but have kind of been in the academic realm. And now, more recently, that's been pulled into the public eye and having these conversations with government and companies, like industry partners, and where nonprofits, for-profits, how they can respond to it. But it's such a difficult question because we all have intersectionality in our life. And it does not matter whether you identify as a specific race or specific religion, specific culture. That's not the only definition of intersectionality. There's so many other components to it. And having said that, it's also difficult to expect yourself to know and understand all the intersectionalities that are present as well. So for And I think even within myself, I'm on this journey of trying to understand my own intersectionality. I am born in India. I identify as a South Asian woman, but the reality is most of my life I did not live in the country. I lived outside the country, but grown up with the same concepts and the same cultural beliefs. But if you look at people who are more recent immigrants, they have been able to move forward as the culture and the cultural beliefs have evolved in the last 30 plus years. My beliefs are what my parents instilled in me. And that in some ways is a lot more traditional, a lot more conservative. And it's recognizing that and recognizing where those changes need to come. But at the same time, for those where they have moved along as the evolution of culture has taken place, they are still finding similar barriers. So maybe one of the silent barriers, as you had called it, one thing that I can bring up is this thought of your work is your work and home is home. Who you are at work does not reflect who you are at home, and vice versa. But is that really true? As humans, we can compartmentalize really well, but the deep-seated beliefs and personality traits stay true to regardless of which environment you're in. So if a South Asian woman has been raised with media that represents her as someone who is supposed to be, all giving and be perfect all the time, be the best mother and be the best daughter-in-law, and be the best daughter and be the best wife, while also having her own independent personality, while also being involved in the community and giving back. But at the same time, at work, be excelling at everything and be in leadership positions. And there's so much pressure being put on being this well-rounded, perfect individual. But men are being raised with more so of okay, you know what? You do well at work, you can come home and rest. Or you support at home, then you do not need to do as much at work because you have a partner. You're giving space for that partner. And that's the big thing is when a man does it, they're giving space for something to happen in the woman's life. But if a woman does it, it's oh, she's given up something. She's given up her career so that her partner can have that. Or she's given up being a good mother to have a career. But if a man does it, that's not usually the wordings that we would use. We tend to praise them for this. So I think that regardless of what culture and what background you come from, there are these internalized thoughts that come from very, very young age. And there's research that shows that this is coming from ages 5 and 6 years old. Yeah. And now when you're 25, 35, and you're trying to make life decisions, but that's a deep-seated belief for you, how do you battle that? And I think those are the intersectionalities that we're talking about. It's how do you change that, a little bit of that mindset, but at the same time, how do you embrace the fact that you come from this culture and bring that into work? How do you bring that side to you at work and be accepted and feel belonged? That's a whole other component of this.
Totally. And I'm resonating so much with everything you're sharing, Roopali, because I think that first step and the reason for my loaded question was to actually just say that we need to break the silence around these struggles, right? Because to your point, oftentimes if we've grown up in a way where we've trained ourselves to code switch, this is another term that gets used, but like you said, we're a certain way at work, we're a certain way at home. We think we can compartmentalize. However, as you put it, our deep-rooted belief systems are still going to show up in different ways, whether or not we want that to, right? But we're at work and we're acting a certain way, or at home we're acting a certain way. And then there are these other stereotypes and notions around us that also pressure us to be the perfect mother, be the perfect career woman, like showcase to the community that you're doing so well in your career and you've earned all these accolades, right? Like there's so much pressure that comes with that. And what I love about our project and our work together is also being able to actually understand and unpack what are those barriers, and can we put voice to them? Can we actually collect the stories of and the lived experiences of those in the community to put voice to that? And also to say, to your point, like this isn't just about this intersectionality of South Asian or being a woman. It's actually what do we learn through this that we can apply to any type of intersectionality, whether that's neurodiversity, whether that's disability, because unless we take the time to really reflect and unpack that, then we're not going to be able to even name the issue, and then B, actually find solutions to be able to address the issue. And I know I'm getting a little technical here, but that's something that we're finding through our literature review process that we've just been through. And now we're in a stage of collecting data collection, right? And there's that whole concept of meta-reflexivity, which is about our ability to critically reflect on these things. So I'm curious, Roopali, I don't know if now's the time to kind of dive into our project work together, but is there more that you wanted to share around even this topic of what is that impact of that added workload and on South Asian women's ability to have that work-life balance, and then how might that show up in leadership roles as well?
Let me give an example. Now, this is not a lived experience for myself, but I know that this is a lived experience for many women. In South Asian countries, many of the South Asian countries, I'm not generalizing to all, but for many of them, when a woman goes to an interview, one of the interview questions that is not necessarily considered fair, but is asked nevertheless is, are you married? Do you have permission from your husband to work? So now let's take that woman who's had to answer this question and say, yes, I have the permission. I have the ability to come out and work, and I will be a dedicated worker in your company. This person now moves to Canada, where in Canada, there is already struggles of your credentials. There's struggles of ensuring that you can actually get a job in your field. You come with a name that is associated with the South Asian culture, and some people may consider that as more difficult to pronounce, or may have preconceived notions about your race, your religion, your beliefs. You go in for this interview. Let's say you get to that point and you go in for this interview. You're still thinking that, okay, do I still have permission to do this? Am I going to be able to create a work-life balance here when I don't have this added support system that I had back home? It's myself, my partner, maybe aging parents, maybe their neighbors that can support you, but it's not at the level that it used to be back home. It's not years of community that are willing to step in to support you. Now you're in this position. You landed your job, but because you lack that support system, you lack that community support, and there's this internalized monologue of, I need to do better because I was given permission to do. I am so lucky compared to all these other people who did not have that. And I think that is where there is a lot of added burden that comes in. It's this thought of, it's not just about like, I need to show off how much I'm achieving. It is this notion of I need to show that I made it and others can too. And the added burden of the thought of if I have lifted myself up, I must lift everyone up with me while also being able to do this for my family and being able to be that perfect like workplace employee. On a very different note, let me create a different scenario. You are someone from within Canada being raised with a South Asian background, and you don't necessarily have that concept of what you want to do with life, but you kind of just go one degree after another because it just flows for you. You don't necessarily have that mentorship to figure out where your skill sets can be best utilized. Instead, you've been following this path because this is the path that most South Asian parents understand and know. So you go down that traditional path and you land in a position that you are not happy with, but you're content because it brings in a salary. Or you end up in grad school. As someone who went through grad school, I have to give a shout out to grad students. You go to get grad school, which is like really low in terms of how much stipend you get. And the hours are really demanding. But there's this notion for a lot of South Asian parents, especially when it comes to girls, well, but you need to get married. How will you handle being married and having long hours? Those two concepts cannot go together. And now there's this added burden of, okay, I need to figure out this work-life balance without being in a situation where the work-life balance is needed. I just need to prove that I can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And these are those like added invisible burdens in a way, where we're constantly thinking, what is approved by my family, by my community, by society, and what is approved for my career, my workplace, my employer.
Yes.
And it's bouncing between those two things without realizing how much toll that actually takes on you. I have no idea if I answered your question.
I did, 100%. And just even as you were sharing that, I felt my hair on my arm kind of rising because I think it reflects the actual lived experience of what many of us go through. And even just being able to make the invisible visible is in a way empowering. Do you feel that?
I hope empowering. I think the word empowering itself almost, there are times when I battle with the word because sometimes it feels like, oh yeah, you never had any power and so now you do. But there are many who have had the power. They've been making conscious decisions for their lives. It's just going back to that intersectionality. It is your own lived experiences that inform the decisions that you make. You may or may not have wanted that decision, but you've been able to make that decision. And I think sometimes when we say empowering and we've been able to empower women, it's almost saying like the women didn't have any power over their lives before, and now we've been able to give it to them. I don't have a different word that fits where like I think this work goes, but I think one of the things it does is it allows for reflecting on why you've made those decisions, what in your life really influenced you to make that decision? And everyone's needs are different. Everyone has, some people need money. Some people need time to take care of loved ones. Some people need whatever, fill in the blank. And they make the decisions for those. But one of the things we do is allow them to reflect on why they've made those decisions. Were those decisions made because that was their choice by choice, lack of a better words? Or is it a choice because of internalized messages that they've had throughout their lives?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's where I see empowerment coming in, from the place of not to say that the person didn't have any agency in the first place, because everybody does, right? But sometimes we get stuck in these kinds of monologues, internalized messages that make us feel like we're the victim. But instead, if we were able to understand why we made those decisions, or what is it about being informed in order to make a decision, that I think restores that sense of agency and power to go, okay, I can make an informed decision, versus I'm just doing this because this is what other people think I need to do, or this is what I might feel ashamed otherwise if I don't do the thing that I think I'm supposed to do, right? So that's, I think, a really interesting part of this work. And Roopali, I'm also wondering, like, do you think there's value to speaking about, so let's say, yes, we've named the barriers, we've started to bring some voice to these issues and make the invisible visible. That's part one. Even just helping South Asian women themselves to identify what these issues are. On the other end of that scale is like, what do others do in the community, right? Whether it is the South Asian community and parents, whether it is employers, whether it's educators, what can then they do once we're aware of this information? And I guess maybe I'm inviting you into a little bit more of a deep dive into our Breaking Barriers project, right? Because that is sort of the goal for us to be working together, is to be able to help identify and create avenues for that systemic change.
Yeah. No, you said that really well. There's so many tips and tricks out there on what can women do to enhance their careers. You want to go into a leadership position, stand in a certain pose and speak in a certain way and lean in. There's a lot that's out there that women are constantly bombarded with. But with this project, and something that I love about this project is, from the start, we did not go in saying that what we want to do is tell women, hey, women, these are your barriers. This is what you do to fix it. Instead, we're inviting others who are key stakeholders in a woman's life. It's going back to parents and guardians. How are you raising your sons and daughters, and someone who may not identify as either of those genders? How are you raising them in a way that is not adding that invisible burden on them? When it comes to educators, what are you doing to understand the intersectionality of your students? How are you ensuring that they feel seen and heard and represented in the education that you're providing? There's a huge shift that is starting to happen with bringing in engineers and scientists in school and getting young students looking at them and starting to identify themselves in these positions. But there's still more work to be done. There's still a lot that we need to do in terms of recognizing how that intersectionality plays a role and who may or may not go. Like there are some educators that I've personally talked to that have the stereotype of, oh, you're South Asian, of course you'll go into engineering. Of course you'll go into medicine.
Oh, you're so good at math.
Yeah, you must be good at math. Like there's so many of these stereotypes that still exist that do not allow those students to explore other skill sets, or be able to take the skill sets that they're learning in STEM and say, how can they translate this to other careers? And that is something that is still ongoing. When it comes to community leaders, in the South Asian community, we have always been a very community-led community. I'm not sure.
Totally.
Words.
Yeah. Community is so important, right?
It's so important to us. Ever since we were kids, it's either those close-knit family friends that we get together with every so often, we celebrate festivals with. Maybe it's going to Milas, or it's going to, like, Eid is coming up. There's tons of celebrations happening for that, building to that. There's what's happening in like gurudwaras and masjids and mandirs, and going for the prayers and finding community over there. There are schools in place. Oh, and shouldn't forget churches as well, and synagogues, right? Like there are schools there that are also present for the community, and it's people who look like you that are teaching the people who look like you, including yourself. And this is where a core identity gets formed. So what can they do to help identify, hey, these are barriers that we see, and how can we alleviate those barriers for these young girls, young boys, and for the women that are in the community itself? What are additional support systems that we can provide that will support them? And those are some tips and tricks for them that we can come in with. And then additionally, when it comes to employers, we know there's a lot that employers can do. This is not something that is unknown. Employers know this. There is always, even under employers, there's intersectionality of whether you're a small business, and you're a mid-sized business, are you a large business, are you a startup? Do you work in government? Do you work for a nonprofit? How those policies can be set in place? Who do you have? But above and beyond that, something that we constantly hear is about mentorship, the lack of mentorship, the lack of representative mentorship. And what can employers be doing to provide that? Whether if they themselves within their company cannot provide it, how can they provide these and bring in third party that can provide that mentorship to the people in their employees essentially? So there are all of these key stakeholders, all of who have an influence on how successful or how happy or how content a woman is with her life, both personal and professional. And, we, in our project, we are focusing on STEM fields because that's what we do. And we know that we're underrepresented in these fields. However, there are many educators that think that, oh, but South Asian, you guys graduate with these degrees. Sure, we do. But we're not in the workforce as much as you think we are. And why is that? Is that because of familial, societal, community barriers, or is that due to employer barriers? That's another thing to actually raise awareness about as well, to see how can these other stakeholders change the system so that that glass ceiling can at least have a crack in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is exactly why I'm feeling so grateful and privileged to be able to work with Lotus STEMM and yourself, Roopali, to be able to come together and actually do a deep dive into the research and utilize the wealth of expertise and leadership and community building that Lotus STEMM brings, right? While from, my behalf, being able to conduct research, being able to develop those resources and practical tips and tricks and tools that the ecosystem broadly can use to be able to start to break down these barriers. It's so important. And maybe I touched on this before, but we are in that data collection stage right now. So Roopali, I'd love for you to plug a little bit about Lotus STEMM and where people can go to if they want to take part in the survey we're doing. We're actually in the middle of the survey, but we're also launching focus groups. And we would love to collect stories and hear your perspectives, hear your voices, especially if you identify as a South Asian woman and you're able to share your experience with us. And then from there, we would love to be able to also engage the broader community and stakeholders to participate. So I'll leave it to you to do a little plug, Roopali.
Absolutely. As you said, we are in that data collection phase. What we are looking for is South Asian women who have any level of STEM background. So that means if you've had an education, maybe an undergraduate education, maybe you went to college and you got a certificate in one of the technical STEM careers, and you could be unemployed currently, you could be employed, you could be self-employed. As long as you are someone who identifies as a South Asian woman, 18 plus, in Canada for a minimum of 2 years, we really are inviting you to fill out the survey. The survey is something that allows us to collect quantitative and qualitative data. But then this is where you have the opportunity to also sign in for the focus groups, as you mentioned, Gayathri. Those focus groups will really help us bring those stories and develop the resources. So the survey along with the focus groups is what we're using as the evidence-based information that's needed for creating these resources that would be created to live online, as well as do in-person workshops for the key stakeholders that we talked about. Now, if you are interested in joining our survey and filling it out, you can go and get all of the information on our website, which is www.lotusstem with 2 Ns.org/breaking barriers. And that would give you all of the information about the project, including our generous funder, which is the Women and Gender Equity Department of the Government of Canada. This project is something very close to both of our hearts. And I think for a lot of women who are also in the situation and just you want an opportunity to tell your story, we're inviting you to come tell us. We don't want to create resources based off biases. We want to create resources based off what you tell us. So again, that's www.lotusstem.org/breaking barriers. And you can get all the detailed information about the project and how you can get involved with the survey, which is online, and focus groups, which will also be online. So we're trying to remove some of those barriers of travel.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to link the website in the show notes of this podcast as well. And once again, Roopali, it's such a privilege. Thank you for entrusting Campfire Kinship to work alongside and partner with you to be collecting these stories and developing resources through that evidence-based research. So I really appreciate this opportunity, Roopali. And I have one final question for you, which is the question I ask all my guests, which is to complete the sentence, I feel a sense of belonging when.
I feel a sense of belonging when I can enter a room and feel comfortable.
I love that.
And it's not, I'll just add to that. It's not to say it's only STEM rooms that can feel uncomfortable. There are times when I will go into a mandir and walk into a room and feel uncomfortable because I don't feel like I fit in. I can walk into community group meetings that are focused on the same conversation that we're having related to women in STEM and feel completely out of place and uncomfortable. So yeah, I think that the sense of walking into a room and an immediate, you're accepted here, just as you are. That is the key.
And you can just be yourself authentically.
authentically.
Yeah. Well, you've been so authentic in this conversation, Roopali. I felt that throughout our conversation. I've always felt that in all our conversations, and just being able to be ourselves. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for this great conversation. It's a wonderful morning.
Likewise.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Hearth to Heart. I'm your host, Gayathri Shukla, founder of Campfire Kinship. If you'd like to learn more about storytelling, come visit campfirekinship.com. If you liked today's episode, hit the subscribe button and join us for future episodes. This podcast is being produced in partnership with CGSW 90.9 in Treaty 7 land in Calgary.